Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I am your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined with Representative Ray Lopez, who was elected to the Texas Legislature in 2019 to serve House District 125, which encompasses much of San Antonio's west and northwest sides. Representative Lopez strongly advocates for veterans, seniors, public education, and working families. Representative Lopez, thank you so much. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, I appreciate you being here. It's a real pleasure getting to speak to you and other representatives and so many others on this podcast. It's really great. So let's start with some easy, basic stuff. Well, give me some of your background and experience. Who are you?
Sure.
Who are you? What do you do? Classic.
Yeah, why am I doing this? That question probably can best be answered by my wife, because she has her own version of who I am and why I do what I do. I'll do my best to give you my version of it to kind of up with her, because she's pretty spot on. I retired from AT&T after 34 years of being in the telecommunications environment over a pretty tumultuous time. I went through divestiture and the phone company splitting up, coming back together, going through all that reorganizational time in our country when telecommunications was being, redesigned. And that taught me quite a bit from an organizational perspective, how to, set goals and objectives. I was there for 34 years. And during that time, of course, AT&T encouraged all of its managers to be involved in the community. And I did. I ran for school board here in Northwest San Antonio, and I won, and I served as president of the school board the last couple of terms, and started taking a lot of that organizational structure that I was learning at AT&T from that large macro perspective, and taking it down to trying to figure out what was the best approach that we could take in school finance. As you know, we've had a school finance issue in our state, I guess, forever. Certainly generationally, we've been dealing with this for quite some time. And now this was back in the 90s, Brad. So, we were dealing, even when I got on the school board in 1990, we were dealing already with a third Supreme Court decision on what was later termed as the Robin Hood funding plan. Yeah. So I spent almost 10 years on the school board, decided that was probably enough. And I've kind of focused my time back at AT&T, where I stayed there till 2009 and ultimately retired. At that time, I figured, and that's where my wife and I might have a divergence on our objectives here. I think my objective was to continue to serve in the community and try to figure out what was the best approach for me to take to be able to serve well. I think her approach was get him out of the house. He's retired, and he's crazy, and he's running me ragged around the house. The honey-do list isn't getting addressed the way it should. All joking aside, I decided right about the time that I retired in 2009 to run for city council here in San Antonio in District 6. I did, and again, fortunate enough to win. The term limits at that time are still the same, but the term limits had just changed from 2 2-year terms to 4 2-year terms. And I kind of thought that may be enough time to be able to go and implement some institutional changes that we needed to kind of address here in San Antonio. And we started very, very aggressively to try to figure out, where is the best place to focus our time and our treasure, right, as a city. And we came up with what I thought, and I still do, believe that it's probably the most important thing we need to focus on, and that's education. Yeah. Question then becomes, Brad, is, so where do you put your money, right? DEA, the state spends an awful lot of money in education, but there are a lot of gaps. And so what we tried to do is to identify what could the city, if anything, do to take its little bit of treasure that we were willing to commit to it and invest it where it would make the best impact. We pulled together a pretty extensive committee with local leaders, education leaders, business leaders, and things of that nature. And we, as an organization, worked for about 6 months, and we talked about issues, investigated issues, got all kinds of reports on where we might best be spending our time. And we talked about, high school dropout rates, teen pregnancy rates, repeat teen pregnancy rates, all of those things that are creating a bad environment for our kids to be successful. And at the end of the day, what we wound up coming to a conclusion on unanimously, by the way, was that if we could improve reading proficiency at the third grade level, we would probably be able to make the best impact for our kids and assuring some level of increased success.
Yeah.
We started down that path. We realized also that you really can't start with third grade programs. You really got to start early on. And so here in San Antonio, we created an organization where we created what we call pre-K for SA, which took 3 and 4 year olds and put them into a pre-K environment and started doing all the intense, teaching these kids how to, how to raise their hand, how to, learn to get along with each other, how to share, how to do those kinds of things, which was many of the struggles that our kindergarten teachers were telling us was part of the problem. They're not prepared to kind of learn to be taught. And so if you can prepare a little bit better, we might be able to be more successful. But we didn't want to go anecdotally. We set up a very extensive measuring process, and it has proven to be very, very successful. And we were able to do that. The other thing that I did while I was on council is recognizing that taking care of kids is important. Also taking care of our seniors, of which I was obviously entering that realm. All of us want to enter that realm at some point.
Yeah.
So we came up with, a pretty significant investment on how we structured our senior services programs in the city. We created a pretty comprehensive senior center program that is still functioning very, very effectively, and was able to take care of many of those seniors and address the needs that they had. So I made it through my 8 years. At that time, I was asked to serve because I was retired, and I was the only one that was retired on council.
Yeah.
And could dedicate the time. And again, my wife dubbing me the busybody. I was asked to serve on things like the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is an organization that tries to find funding and invest it in transportation initiatives and things of that nature. So I did all that kind of stuff, realizing that my understanding of those things from an organizational perspective is really about identifying funding, what are the strings attached to that funding, and then applying them to the resources that were best required within our county. And we did quite a bit of that. San Antonio has been growing in leaps and bounds. We've been able to do our best to try to keep up with infrastructure investments and the like. And I served my 8 years, finished doing that, and loving life, and retired. And once again, back to the house, and my wife let my honeydew list grow and grow and grow.
Yeah.
And and I did my best to try to address it, and not really thinking I was going to pursue any more political roles. A kind of an interesting thing happened here in San Antonio. A longtime serving county commissioner, Paul Elizondo, great individual, great leader in our community, passed away. And my state representative, Justin Rodriguez, was appointed to replace him.
Yep.
And that kind of opened up in 2019, House District 125. And I got a couple of phone calls saying, hey, man, you ought to consider it. If you're not doing anything else, you might want to jump into it. Honestly, my biggest hesitation was I had never really run in a partisan race. All these races, whether they were school board or city council, were nonpartisan, and I kind of like that. But I jumped into it, and won. And now I'm now headed into my fourth reelection this coming November. And since I don't have an opponent, I guess I should be able to count that one as a win. But I won't do it yet. But
I think it sounds like maybe your wife is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and like not letting anybody else run against you.
I got a feeling. So, so the terms that I was there for, when I first got there, I got assigned to Justin's old committees, which was Defense and Veterans Affairs, and being a former Army veteran, I thought that was quite appropriate, and I was certainly ready, willing, and able to take on that challenge. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the bills that we worked very, very hard on relative to DA. And my second committee kind of has migrated from one committee to another. At my first term, I was on what they call JJF5, Juvenile Justice and Family Affairs, kind of managing all the Child Protective Services issues and things of that nature.
Yeah.
My second was I asked to be on DVA. I was appointed to DVA, and I got on corrections. Well, corrections is the prison system, which is kind of you scratch your head and say, okay, what can I do, to improve that scenario? And we got pretty intense into some of those issues. And in my third term, I was honored by the speaker to be appointed to be vice chairman of DVA, Defense and Veterans Affairs, and got appointed in this last term, to a completely different committee, which was corrections. And I'm kind of going like, okay, guys, I don't really know exactly what we need to do. The very, very first thing that happened was we've got tremendous problems in our prison system, recidivism, even infrastructure issues, making sure that these folks are at least living in reasonable conditions with air conditioning, things of that nature, that our employees, our state employees have an air conditioning process within the prison system that they can at least not be in that incredibly intense heat and being able to do their work the best they possibly can. Yeah. So we worked that kind of stuff, but really my focus had been, what am I going to do with DVA? And now in this past term as vice chairman, I was in a position to not only move my own bills forward, but to look at all the bills that were coming out of the legislative initiatives of all of my colleagues and try to pick and choose the ones that I agreed with wholeheartedly that I thought would make the best impact in the Defense and Veterans Affairs, and was able to work with many of my colleagues to get many bills passed. Most of those bills dealt with, and the ones that certainly that I sponsored, was one, recognition of the high suicide rate within veterans. Yep. And one is to recognize it, right? And to give it the level of attention that it deserved. We declared September the 22nd as a Veteran Suicide Prevention Awareness Day, just to kind of put it out there. But that doesn't stop the suicides. What we need to do is, one, become aware of it, and then start to figure out what is causing these veterans to commit suicide at a rate of, at that time, it was about 22 veterans a month were committing suicide. And that's not acceptable. We've made a lot of inroads into that, and creating policies to provide them resources and to provide them outreach. And oftentimes, veterans will recognize that other veterans are relatively hard-headed. They won't reach out and try to get help.
Sure.
You got to pick up the phone and call on them. You got to go to the areas where they, quote unquote, hang out. And many of them are unhoused, homeless. Yeah. You go to where they are and offer them, let them know what's going on relative to services, and try to, make that hookup, to make that link. We've been successful in doing that. The suicide rate is dropping. We are in a position to now try to give them some level of hope by virtue of providing them jobs and job opportunities, housing opportunities, and then being able to get veterans benefits available that are already available. They just don't know about them. So that's work that I've been doing. I'm certainly hopeful that this coming term, I can ask to sit on Veterans Affairs again, and hopefully I'll be successful and continue that level of work. But let me just kind of also clarify one other thing is, sure. I mentioned the Veterans Affairs Committee that I sit on is called Defense and Veterans Affairs. And most people just recognize the Veterans Affairs component of it. The defense component of it is incredibly important. And our chairman, Terry Wilson, last session, kind of brought the very first meeting, the attention in the very first meeting on the D part of DVA, to make sure we all understood what is that responsibility within our committee on defense for Texas. Well, one of the things that D stands for is we as a DVA, or Defense and Veterans Affairs, really go into action when the governor calls a emergency for whether it's a tornado, a hurricane, an earthquake, wildfires, you name it,
Yeah.
including border security. So when the governor calls an emergency call, that function comes under the D part of our DEA, which means any organization that is going to be deployed, whether it's DPS during any of those emergencies, or Texas military during any of those emergencies, or any other state resource is deployed, they really fall under our jurisdiction. And for us to oversee it, make sure that the resources are there, make sure that it's being done in the most effective way, has become this last term a big focus for us. And those are the kinds of in-depth understanding of what our roles are as representatives. I mean, it's not about red issues and blue issues. It's really what I always say, it's about red, white, and blue issues. It's about what are we going to do for our community, for our state, that's in the best interest of all. And sometimes we do get bogged down on red and blue, but the reality of it is it's about, how do we make our communities better? So that's the kind of that I've done. I'm anxious to continue serving, and we can continue that level of discussion on the podcast to the extent that you want.
Sure. No, of course. So yeah, since there was a lot there that I want to bring that I'd like to follow up on from I don't know, school finance to a lot of other stuff. But since we're on the emergency preparedness and stuff like that, I wonder. It does seem like Texas, it's a big state. We got a lot of natural resources, different climates, all sorts of stuff. Natural disasters happen, this, that, and the other. Is Texas, as far as emergency preparedness goes, are we prepared?
Well, I think that we are generally prepared. We certainly have organizationally tried to be there, whether it's being able to deploy our DPS, Department of Public Safety, in a way that's most effective. The problem with DPS in deploying them, whenever we don't just automatically add more DPS troopers whenever an urgent requirement pops up, like the border or Operation Lone Star. What we do is we pull resources from other parts of the state and ship them to the border, which means that while we will get a good manpower response on the border, it creates a bit of a problem in other parts of the state from a manpower perspective, and we've got to be able to address that a little bit more efficiently than what we've done in the past. Unlike our military, Texas military, when we deploy those individuals, like the Operation Lone Star, we're activating them. We're pulling them out of the general population that are going to work every day, right? They are reservists, so to speak, and we activate them for a year or longer. We send them to like Operation Lone Star. That creates a bit of a problem in our workforce right now. How does the workforce go and backfill those individuals when we deploy them? But from a state perspective, we've got the manpower there, but it creates another bubble of resource, right? These folks come from somewhere. Whether they're doctors, lawyers, technicians, teachers, they get pulled out of their work to be sent to function on the border, and it creates a problem where they left. So we've got to be able to be in a position to address those issues, to address the manpower issues across the entire state.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Let's just, you pull a teacher for something like this. I guess maybe they're in the Texas military, and they get deployed for whatever emergency that's happening, whatever it gets declared. Is it similar? What happens to that position for that teacher? Does the school in this specific scenario, it could be I don't know, a retail worker or whatever the case may be. How long can they be deployed for? Is it an indefinite amount of time until the emergency is over? Are there deployments of 2, 3, 4 months, whatever? Is there job security involved? How does that work out?
Yeah, well, the deployment tenure or time really depends on the the nature of the emergency. Hurricane, obviously, that's a little bit shorter term. They go in and you know, evacuation issues and things of that nature. Wildfires like we had up in North Texas, you know, that's a period of time that they were deployed to try to support the local fire departments and the like. Relatively short period of time, could be a month, could be 6 weeks. And by both federal and state regulation, employers are required, you know, to hold those positions for them.
Yeah.
And in most cases, there's never an issue. There's seldom an issue that I've really heard of, because when somebody goes and applies for a job, they tell their employer, their future employer, that they're in the military, and they realize that there's a requirement for them to allow them to be gone for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Where it becomes a little difficult is, for example, I mentioned Operation Lone Star a couple of times. The Operation Lone Star deployments for our Texas military are really based on a 1-year deployment. So if you are a Texas military soldier, a trooper, and the governor deploys you, you're going to be gone for a year.
Yeah.
Mandatory. The requirement is for a year. Beyond that, you have to volunteer to stay a little longer if you want.
Yeah.
Now the pay is good. The benefits have gotten better. The delivery of the services for pay and benefits have gotten better. There was a problem in the beginning that's been addressed. The problem becomes once you're gone from your regular civilian profession and you're gone for a year or more, you're losing opportunity for personal advancement within your profession,
Sure.
Perhaps training issues that you may have missed out on, tenure issues. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, right now, I mean, I hear our military troops, you know, talk about as a concern. You know, hey, I've been here for a year and a half, serving my state in Operation Lone Star. And I know that when I get back, I will, you know, not be in a ready position to get promoted within my job or whatever that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no legislation addressing that, but we should have a level of discussion on how we best make sure that they're not punished, so to speak,
Yeah.
Or lose opportunity because of their service to the state. So those are the kinds of things that I think that we need to be addressing over the course of the next legislative session. So we'll see.
Is it just a function of, you know, I don't know, a 1-year deployment? Like you said, for a hurricane, certainly the disaster lasts much longer than this for the people that are affected by it, you know, but a Texas military service person or whoever that gets sent down there to help, maybe that deployment is only a couple weeks, maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks, whatever. And that's easier to manage. But for instance, something like Operation Lone Star, where you're gone for a year and then you can volunteer for more. I mean, is it really could it be just a function of like, hey, that's just too long? Maybe just do like 2-month stints. You know, what are the ideas being kicked around, if you can share, if they are being kicked around, to address that problem? Because I mean, if I was gone for a year, I'd miss family, I'd miss work opportunities, I'd miss a lot of stuff. It would be certainly a sacrifice, and certainly a voluntary sacrifice. And I appreciate people that do that. But it's a sacrifice, and it feels like there should be more done to, I don't know, make sure that sacrifice is honored and doesn't damage the person, leave them less than they were when they get back.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion on how and what, and you know, what more we need to do as a state, and I think one of the biggest things that we've addressed in the past, and I'll talk a little bit about what may be coming up in the future. For example, many of our state troopers, our state military, they have their regular civilian job, and they're also going to school. Right, they're taking some low level coursework to try to improve themselves at school. About a year or so ago, when we identified the problem, there were issues with the state not quickly paying tuitions and allowing those soldiers that were now remote could go on a virtual site and do their educational, during their off time, do their educational advancement.
Sure.
But tuitions weren't being paid, logons weren't being activated because payment hadn't been received. So there were some operational struggles with that, and that was causing a significant heartache for those individuals. So we fixed that. There were pay delays. Yeah, you get your pay, but you weren't getting your bonus pay. You weren't getting perhaps benefit for family and the like. we fixed all of that. So continuing to look at the existing system that's in place and make sure that it's as smooth as we possibly can is incredibly important. And we've been at Operation Lone Star for quite some time, and we've been able to fix a lot of the glitches, if you will, what has cropped up. I think the bigger discussion really needs to happen, and no doubt DVA would be a place to have that happen, or perhaps a select committee that the speaker could call to have a discussion on, is Operation Lone Star the best approach for Texas to man those positions on the border?
Yeah.
Recognizing that immigration is a federal issue, not a state issue, right? Mm-hmm. It's not on the state of Texas or Arizona or New Mexico or California to solve. It's up to the federal government to solve. But we can't walk away from the responsibility of contributing to its solution, right? And Operation Lone Star has been that contribution by the state to fix it, to improve it.
Yeah.
But is that the best way of doing it? Knowing that those military personnel assigned to Operation Lone Star is limited in what they can do. They can't arrest. They certainly can enforce whatever laws are within their domain, right? Yeah. And right now, what's been declared at the state level is if you are trespassing, and if you've crossed the border and you are on somebody's property and you have permission from that property owner, that you indeed can arrest them for trespassing. Well, that's a misdemeanor. And they wind up going to jail, and they wind up waiting in jail for a while to get adjudicated. And is that the best process that we have in place to handle that? They're right now not being arrested and turned over to the Border Patrol. We don't do that. That's been by directive of the governor. There's been kind of a territorial debate between the Border Patrol, who are federal troops, and the state troopers on how all that gets handled and the handoffs that happen. Again, there's a significant limitation on what and how we're using those military resources.
Yeah.
So first of all, let me say that the governor is certainly within his right as the commander-in-chief of the state of Texas to deploy, as he sees fit, the military troops in Texas. I mean, that's certainly within his right.
Sure.
Or authority. How we go about doing that, we really need to listen to, if you will, the leadership, the generals that are deploying it, and how best they think we should be positioned to address that. So some of the options that have been talked about is pulling back the Texas military force and replacing those individuals with other, official enforcement people like sheriff's departments, constable departments, things of that nature, but they're not in a position to handle it either. I mean, there's not enough of them. So to be able to make that kind of a transition, we would have to really beef up, if you will, manpower-wise, those jurisdictions, and then give them the authority to be able to go out there and manage the properties along the border, engaging with the property owners who they probably have a pretty good relationship with, and the like. We haven't gotten to that point yet. We haven't come up with an alternative solution, and the governor's pretty intent on continuing to have the military do this function. I still do believe that there's got to be a discussion around, is this the best approach to take? And while, as a veteran, as a vice chairman of the Defense and Veterans Affairs, I'm not going to make that call. I want us to be able to have a plan in place that is, if you will, crafted by those folks that are responsible for doing that. And that's the generals, right? We have a handful of generals that are responsible for the entire state of Texas that would know exactly how they could best deploy their troops. And we need to engage in that discussion. I hope that we're able to craft some legislation that allows us to have that level of discussion in the next session. Technically, the Defense and Veterans Affairs certainly could initiate that discussion. We could also initiate discussion around it, right, and recommendations around it, but it would still have to get past the House, the Senate, and signed by the governor. And I can tell you that the governor probably would not sign something that he's not fully supportive of. And he is very much committed to Operation Lone Star. So that, there's a lot of issues around that. There definitely is a better way. I would hope that somehow or another we would get away from, as I said earlier, the red and blue issues of immigration and think about the red, white, and blue issues of immigration. There was a bipartisan bill at the federal level that addressed a path forward on immigration. Politics got in the way. It never got a vote on the floor. I'm hopeful that, that kind of debate continues. I know that President Biden has issued some orders that are implementing some of the components of that legislation that never made it to the floor.
Yeah.
But there's going to be debate over whether you can do that or not.
Of course.
So again, not an easy solution. Politics kind of gets in the way, and I wish we could, undo that. In my many, many years of being a public servant, I believe me, I have not been able to crack that nut. So I'll keep on trying. I'll keep on trying.
Yeah.
But as important as that is, that's not the only critical thing that's out there. And I'd love to take a minute or two to talk about some other things that I think are critically important.
Yeah, of course. Just real quick, we can move on to other things for sure. I just wanted to ask,
Sure.
You brought up DPS and we're talking about personnel and everything like that. And, you maybe sheriff's departments or constables or whatever could get involved. I live in Austin, and, it seems like at every level of government, there's, of public safety, there's a lack of personnel. There's staffing crises. And I think that even DPS is suffering from something similar. I don't know if it's the same degree as what Austin is suffering. Is that the case with DPS and maybe the Texas military? Are we having staffing issues with the emergency responders across Texas? And is there something that, I don't know, is it on the upswing? Are we starting to turn that around? What can we expect?
Yeah. No, great question. I'm not going to claim to know the answer to it, but
Sure.
I can tell you the people that bring that issue to me is really the public. DPS, for example, mans all the driver's license offices, right?
Yeah.
They do all the driving test and they man all that. And I get calls on a regular basis. I went online. I had an appointment. It didn't get met. I got there. There was a problem with what I did. They told me to go online again, or there were no DPS troops available for me to take the test. I couldn't get things done, and it was a manpower issue. Whether that's directly related to statewide deployment to the border by DPS and creating that vacuum back home or not, I don't know. But that, again, something that is very much within the realm of DVA to try to address that manpower issue. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing it from the DPS troopers, right? And I think because mainly they're good troopers, right? They take their orders, they go do what they need to get done, and you listen to their chain of command and execute the best they can. But I do hear from the public, and they tell me, hey, not having enough DPS troopers is not a good thing. There's so many other things that are creating a problem with that.
Sure.
So again, addressing it from a rational perspective, I think is incumbent on all of us. Take the politics out of it and try to find some good solutions.
Yeah. So you're also on the, Securing Texas from Hostile Foreign Organizations Select Committee, which is sort of a mouthful and something I wasn't really aware of. So, what exactly are y'all focused on? Can you give me an example of a hostile foreign organization that might be a threat to Texas? I'm sure they're out there. I could think of maybe, I don't know, cartels. I don't know.
Of course. Yeah. Well, a little over a month ago, I got the call from the speaker's office saying, hey, would you be willing to serve if, we appoint this committee? And I said, sure, I'll be willing to, no problem, be willing to serve. But can you send me something on it? I said, well, we'll put something together.
Yeah.
And just kind of conjuring up my own assumption of what the meeting is all about, or the charge.
Yeah.
I started calling folks and folks that have been involved in this kind of, foreign hostile country definition.
Yeah.
First person I called was former Congressman Will Hurt, former CIA congressman, and certainly one of those guys that's more about red, white, and blue than red and blue, right? And so we talked a lot about his view of how and what ought to be happening. Last session, the Senate heard a bill and had debate on it, extensive debate on how we would craft legislation that would, in a very short, snippet, would basically limit governments, foreign governments that are hostile to the United States, Russia, China. So, one of the things was to identify, countries that are ill-intended towards the United States, China, Russia, and a handful of others. And to try to, in that Senate bill, was to try to legislate some construct around what we would allow them to do and not do.
Yep.
The bill was heard in the Senate, but it was never heard in the House. And for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, last session, all kinds of things were getting our attention.
Sure.
This one was a critical one, but it never bubbled up on the House side. Now we're trying to have that discussion so that these interim charges will be more prepared to have an in-depth discussion, and perhaps we'll be able to identify how we might be able to take some action on this particular issue. So one of the things that was suggested by Congressman Hurd was, hey, listen, if we take a reciprocal approach to these countries, they don't let us do business in their country, and we should mirror that and not let them do business in ours.
Yeah.
We should put a lot of constraints around anything that they're able to do with a, if you will, with a proxy, right? I mean, they go and align themselves with some other organization, probably a business, that says, I'm going to go and buy, and this is where the example comes in, one of many examples. I'm going to go and develop a relationship with a company. We're going to go and buy several thousand acres in West Texas or in East Texas. We're going to open up a power grid. We're going to open up a solar farm or wind farm. We're going to make that offer of power to military installations and other commercial endeavors. We're going to hook up to them, and all of a sudden you've tapped in to our power grid, our infrastructure. Yeah. And could you backwards engineer that to find out how and what we do and how we manage that grid and how we would manage it in an emergency?
Yeah.
And again, absolutely thinking outside the box. What if this was China? And what if they were able to get that level of information and they decided, I think we're going to invade Taiwan. And right before invading Taiwan, let's go create a little havoc on Taiwan's big brother, the United States. Let's create a little bit of havoc over there and have them deal with massive outages in their infrastructure, in their power grid. And let's go do that while we go do what we need to do. Sure. Is that absurd? Maybe, maybe not.
Well, there are some. Sure. It seems, it hasn't happened, but it seems like it could.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it could. And you think about that scenario, which is probably an easy one to kind of conjure that, that could happen. There are so many others. Could the Russians do the same and decide, hey, we're going to, the Ukrainian initiative, we're going to go ahead and move on into Poland as well. Yeah. And they now have access to our infrastructure, our, grid and things of that nature. And create havoc for us. So we've got to be able to be in a position to kind of protect who has access to that. And again, my time at AT&T tells me that anything, if you understand how decisions are made within an infrastructure, AT&T, where we ran a worldwide network, if you understand the logic on how we deploy that and how we reinforce it, it's not that difficult to reverse engineer what you're doing, what you're about to do, and then throw a wrench into it. Yeah. So that kind of going, okay, am I being paranoid? And the answer is absolutely not. It's just we have to have some level of, emergency preparedness. I could take you back. Many of us remember. Maybe you're quite young, so maybe you don't remember. 9/11.
That's very kind.
Yeah. 9/11. I mean, most people remember where they were on that day, and I remember being with AT&T. We were working on a handful of very large, data center deployments. Yeah, and every data center has emergency plans in place on what happens if my data center goes out, what happens if my bank data center gets hacked or whatever. And there's always backups and second data centers and third data centers and power sources and all kind of stuff. What very few people had thought of is that in a case of a national emergency, like we thought we were in the morning of 9/11, and we were, thinking that this may actually escalate into World War III.
Sure.
We were all beginning to think that. No one had really given thought to data center backup and all that kind of, assuming that there would be no air transport available.
Yeah.
So when you think about scenarios on how I'm going to combat any disaster, and you hadn't thought of one, you're in trouble, because quite honestly, I don't think anybody ever envisioned the air system in the United States shutting down.
Yeah.
So if you're putting together a data center, your backup is to put a bunch of folks on an airplane into your private plane and fly them over to your backup center so you can get everything running. That could not have happened. So
Sure.
we have to have in-depth, intense debate with subject matter experts that understand all these kinds of things, that can come up with all these potentials, right? How do we address all those? And I can tell you that addressing them is a very expensive proposition.
Yeah.
And how much does the government do? How much does commercial resource deployment take on? How much of it do we, as a government, federal or state, demand businesses have that level of backup? I mean, that's an extensive and expensive proposition. I think that our discussion during this committee hearing, I think eventually will get us to that level of discussion. But that's critical. And just to say, well, we need to protect ourselves from our enemies. Well, yeah, of course. How do we go about doing that? And what is the government's role in doing it themselves? And secondly, what legislation do we put in place that requires our business community, our commercial sector, to back themselves up? How much do we put on the power grid and power generators, right? Yeah. Folks that create power, how much do we put on them and how much do we subsidize? So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I think that this committee, let me put it this way, I believe that that's exactly the kind of challenge that we're going to have in front of us. And I have met with a handful of other three-letter agencies and getting their point of view on, hey, they've done this before. Yeah. And here in San Antonio, for example, we have the National Security Administration, NSA.
Yeah.
And there's only 2 NSA facilities in the world, one here and one in Virginia. And while they may not be ready, willing, and able to share their secrets, they can certainly give us some level of guidance. We also have other organizations, whether it's the CIA, FBI, and many others, that deal with this on a regular basis, that think outside the box, that normally us as, citizens, do-gooders, may not think about. So I believe that this is a good approach to take to start the discussion. Like most things, first pass at legislation typically is not comprehensive. Yeah, but it's a start. It's a start, and I think that's what this is all about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds, given your past work experience and life experience, it sounds like you're a good person to be on that committee. So that's great. Well,
thank you.
Representative Ray Lopez, we're getting a little short on time. Is there something else that you wanted to bring up about maybe the next legislative session, or something about your district, anything that you wanted to touch on before we go?
Sure. Yeah, just briefly, every session, every representative does their best to, as they say, bring home the bacon. Sure. Bring money back to the district. I work real closely with the city and the county to identify the issues that they have, and we also work very closely with the military installations here in our area. To make sure that we're providing the resources to support their missions by virtue of investing in our county and our municipalities. Beyond that, we have significant, just like Austin, and I guess everybody else will make the case, growth, and which creates traffic congestion. Here locally, we've been working really, really hard since I got on in the State House to try to identify how we're going to improve one of our largest corridors within my district, which is Highway 16, Bandera Road, for those of that live in San Antonio. and improve transportation through that. That's right now we're at about $185 million textile project that we're trying to get. Well, I'm going to go try to get that funded. And those are things that are incredibly important to my community.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to continue to do. Other partners here in San Antonio that I work very closely with and happen to be part of my district is, we have a very extensive research organization in Southwest Research in the Texas Biomed Center. And they do incredible worldwide research in many areas, to include during the pandemic, on trying to be and were instrumental in providing research along those lines. They're working on all kinds of energy issues and how to transfer energy from one point to another in a cost-effective way. So it's those individuals that I deal with on a regular basis, and they tell me how and what they need. And oftentimes what it is, hey, listen, we need more funding. And so we go back and we try to do that. And that's what we do in the off season. I'm just hopeful that we don't get bogged down with the politics that appear to be rearing their ugly head in Texas like they are at the federal level, and that, we get bogged down with, political nonsense.
Yeah.
We've got plenty to do, and we've got smart people ready to do it if we can just get out of our own way, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Representative Ray Lopez, I really appreciate you taking the time. I wish you the best of luck in the next legislative session, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much.